If you go down to Central Avenue in St. Pete, you'll certainly see a lot of old buildings. The ones they talk about now and then for being the biggest deals 100 years ago. But people don't even begin to understand just how big a deal these places really were here musically back then. One of my favorite things to tell people about is how in the lobby of the Hotel Alexander, sometimes back in the 20s, you'd be able to hear string quartets playing music in the lobby, probably right where Tony's Pizza is today. Another is how Sunshine Records, the first record label in the state, was based at and recorded in places across the street like where Boutique is, or on the spot where the BB&T building is today. Cooler still is how a few buildings down past the old McCrory store, the Florida Arcade was once the hangout spot for every local musician in the afternoon to talk and play their instruments in the 30s. That's including all of the in-house orchestras based out of the Princess Martha, the Detroit, and all the various theaters downtown. But a short walk down from Central to First via 6th Street reveals a building that no one knows about today, but 100 years ago on July 16th of 1926, it was the biggest spot for music in perhaps the entire county. This is the story of the Waring Music Company, a Victor record store ran by the famous band leader Fred Waring, who fell in love with the Sunshine City and helped put it on the map musically. By the time the venture was over, its effect on St. Pete's music scene at the time was unmistakable. It's all forgotten now, so let's change that. For next hour, I, Chase Porter, present to you the story and the music of the Waring Music Company on its 100th anniversary. We'll explore the history of the store back then, the people who ran it, and the music that made it what it was. An additional fun feature is, almost every single song featured comes from my own copies of the original 78 RPM shellac records, all purchased locally from Bananas Records in town. That way it gives it the most chance of these records possibly being originally sold at the Waring Music Company 100 years back. So begins our tribute to the Waring Music Company, St. Pete's first major record store, now over Sunshine 96.7 FM. Our story begins in early 1926, up in the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. What you're hearing right now was the biggest record in early 1926, a song known as Who, by the band of George Olsen and his music, another band worth talking about at a later date. The record was plenty important too for bringing the concept of a vocal trio into popularity, but as for right now, it's one of the best examples of Victor Records by the start of 1926. Those of you who grew up with it in the 40s to the 60s, you know it as RCA Victor. But this predates that merger between the Victor Talking Machine Company and the Radio Corporation of America, the RCA in that name, as those who grew up with it later know it as today. But even back in 1926, Victor Records was an empire. Over in the UK and Europe, you'd know it as HMV, or His Master's Voice, named after their famous painting of the Jack Russell Terrier named Nipper staring into a phonograph horn. 1926 would be the first full year of the electrical era in records, meaning they were finally making records electrically with microphones, meaning that you could hear the full band playing and those singing in near perfect orthophonic clarity now, instead of all muffled by the old-fashioned way of recording with horns. And outside of their competitor Columbia, they were the top label making these electrical records, and as a result they sounded amazing, like we can hear.
Stole my heart away, who makes me dream all day, dreams I know can never come true. Seems as though I'll ever be blue. Means my happiness, who would I answer yes to? Well, you ought to guess who. No one but you.
And so that was Victor. From north, south, east, and west, and all the best artists in the world recorded for them. And of the millions of people owning a phonograph back then, in 1926 alone, Victor would sell 420,000 new ones to people. Along with these new orthophonic processed, electrically made records that they called it, they had a new brand of phonographs varying in sizes and prices, made specially to play this new kind of record, known widely as the orthophonic Victrola. Victrola being their brand of phonograph and subsidiary label, and everyone they know tells the world about it. Whether it's one of their top operatic stars, emulated Galli-Curci, or best Irish tenor John McCormack, crooner Gene Austin, or band leader Paul Whiteman, they all pushed them to tell their fans to buy a new orthophonic Victrola, orthophonic Victor records, and much more, especially in the big cities. At the same time in St. Petersburg, jazz band leader Fred Waring of the nationally known band Waring's Pennsylvanians is visiting and falling in love with the city. Its green benches, colored concrete pavers, Vinoy Hotel, and many of the other attractions being built surely intrigued him, but the music scene surely did too. Both Judd Hill's and Earl Gresh's orchestras being the hottest jazz bands around, and the Royal Scotch Highlanders being the most popular non-jazz band around, plus the crooner Frank Wilson adding a beautiful baritone sound to the music around Sunshine City. Fred himself, being a child of the music stores, surely was charmed by all the music stores downtown, such as Ernest Philpott & Sons on the 400 block with an impressive store in connection to national stars, the Scott Music Company on 4th Street, right where the Voodoo Brewing Company is today, who sold instruments, Edison records, and phonographs, and had their very own special record made with talent from right around town. There were a handful of other notable stores around town, but we could speak all day about them. Fred was an amazingly talented musician himself, a violinist, and like his brother Tom, was a singer and a leader of the nationally known radio and stage band Waring's Pennsylvanians, hailing from Penn State, playing plenty of the new music sweeping across the nation known as jazz, and appealing to college kids all across the nation in every way one could at the time, recording the anthems of the top universities of the country, including several from Penn State. Heck, the Pennsylvanians' biggest hit recording in 1925 with a novelty called Collegiate, and right now in 1926 he was enjoying plenty of success from a song known as Freshie, of the same nature. And of course, Waring's Pennsylvanians was a Victor signed band, and one of their top artists at the time. So due to that influence, it's no surprise that Victor and Waring came to an understanding that investing in the rising Sunshine City of St. Petersburg was a grand idea. And so, the Warings themselves decided to make a record store right here in town. First by finding a good place in town to do it. Who knows of all the possible buildings they scouted out for renting and buying, but we do know the one that they eventually decided on. At the corner of 1st Avenue and 6th Street North, just south of Mirror Lake, was a storefront built roughly in late 1925, yet to house any known businesses in it. In a prime spot next to the Rutland Building, Hotel Alexander, and several other coveted spots in town. This is what Fred and Tom Waring and Victor executives landed on to become their new record store in town. The place became known as the Victor Building. It was to be the most luxurious and extravagant attraction that St. Petersburg had ever seen in the realm of phonographic exploits. Back then, a dedicated store just to selling records and record players of any kind was a rarity outside of major cities. So general stores would have sections of records, and so would most music stores too. But inside the Victor Building, Victor products came first, and everything else would come second. If you look at the storefront today, it's strictly a one-story affair. But take out the drop ceiling and the centuries worth of renovations and gentrifications, you'll find the original second story being built on the balcony inside the store, looking similar to that of an observation deck. They described the area as a salon, a Victor salon, where a lounge for customers to consider their purchases as well as just hang out. Back on the first story was booths that had thousands of records, perhaps the entire catalog of Victor records by this point of over 20,000, as well as many models of Victrolas, especially orthophonic ones from all over the shop. 4 different private listening booths with soundproofing, making sure it's silent from the outside, and plenty of framed pictures of Victor artists and his master's voice painting as decor. Plus, Victor repairmen for if your phono had a problem. Dedicated Victor salesmen too. Outside of Victor products, the Waring Music Company also sold pianos by the biggest brands in the nation, including Chickering, Lester, and Gulbranson, as well as smaller band instruments by the major brands of Buescher, Kahn, and Martin. Not to mention a small Russian restaurant in the Victor Building called the Petrushka Restaurant. Opening day of the Victor Building was on the 16th. Fred Waring, the acting president, along with singing Tom Waring as the vice president, and third brother M.C. Waring being the secretary of the store, were all in attendance, along with the general manager J. Bryce Wilmoth for the opening day. There were ads all over the St. Petersburg Times, and support from other businesses, as well as music played by the local Thomas Danks Orchestra and a quartet from the Petrushka restaurant. Fred Waring did a record signing all day for any and all records by Waring's Pennsylvanians too. So if any of you ever find any of his records from this point throughout Florida, there's a big chance they came from here. So let's hear one of these new records from the time selling at the Victor Building. It's Waring's Pennsylvanians with I Love My Baby, a new jazz hit for the band, 100 years later now over Sunshine 96.7. You just heard Waring's Pennsylvanians' 1926 hit recording of I Love My Baby over Victor Records, a song that exactly 100 years ago, on July 16, 1926, copies would have been playing of, as well as being signed by Fred Waring himself. Inside the storefront of the Victor Building, a massive Victor record store created by Fred himself on the corner of 1st Street and 6th Avenue in St. Petersburg. Sunshine 96.7 is celebrating the 100th anniversary of the opening of the Victor Building and the business inside it, the Waring Music Company. Nowadays, it hosts such businesses like the Dress Up Studio, Hair on Central, Twig, and the Book and Bottle, the last of which still shows much of its original interior, from the Art Deco arches to the checkerboard black and white flooring. Fred and Tom Waring were both president and vice president of the store, but they also were the leaders of one of the biggest orchestras in the country, Waring's Pennsylvanians, so naturally they couldn't stay all the time. When they were gone, they left General Manager J. Bryce Wilmoth in charge. And who was better to leave in charge than him? Wilmoth had previously been in a music store in Lakeland, and before that was one of the top Victor execs working in the main plant in Camden, New Jersey, as well as in Buenos Aires, Argentina. He hired good people under him, and the store ran like clockwork. It wasn't just a music store, even though that was the main feature of the Waring Music Company. It was also a community space, having weekly programs of live music by local musicians, nationally known musicians, as well as tutoring for those who wanted to learn an instrument. Many who played in these programs at times were not local and instead national, if not international names, such as the Italian dramatic soprano Catherine Updegraff, English pianist Lance Harding, Irish baritone singer T. Markwell, violinist Wotan Zollner, whistler Miss Cecil Hubbard, Irish tenor William McGill, among countless others. All of popular salon or concert varieties, playing popular and classical songs. These shows would be so popular that it would pack a store and people would sit on the green benches outside in the nighttime just to listen in. And all this was just in the first year. Meanwhile, new Victor records of these artists were coming out and selling out, along with many national hits too. So we'll play two here. One of these traditional classical or concert soloist type artists similar to the aforementioned names, and a popular quintet record that was quickly flying off the shelves in the summer of 1926. One of the most beloved violinists of the era was Fritz Kreisler, a soloist with many accolades and songs that the soloists at the Waring Music Company covered often, and whose Victor recordings sold and were often stocked. And with the older acoustical records being sold cheaper, this particular number, On Miami Shore, would be put on clearance surely. After that will be the new hit sensation from a Rodgers and Hart musical that everyone wanted in their home and sold fast. It's the vocal quintet The Revelers, with the romantic singing of The Blue Room. Now over Sunshine 96.7 FM.
plans, here will suit your plans. Read the little blueprint. Here's your mother's room, here's your brother's room, on the wall are blueprints. Here's the kiddies' room, here's the biddies' room, here's the pantry line with shelves. Here a plan for us, something good for us, where we too can be ourselves at ease. We'll have a blue room, a new room, or two rooms, where every day's a holiday, because you're married to me. Not like a ballroom, a small room, a hall room, where I can smoke my pipe away, with your wee head up on my knee. We will thrive on, keep alive on, just nothing but kisses, with Mr. and Mrs. on little blue chairs. You'll sow your trousseau, and Robinson Crusoe is not so far from worldly cares as a blue room far away upstairs. Da 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 dee, da dee da. We'll have a blue room, a new room, or two rooms, where every day's a holiday, because you're married to me. Oh, I love you, Molly. Not like a ballroom, a small room, a hall room, where I can smoke my pipe away, with your wee head up on my knee. We will thrive on, keep alive on, just nothing but kisses, with Mr. and Mrs. on little blue chairs. Trousseau, your trousseau, and Robinson Crusoe is not so far from worldly cares as a blue room far away upstairs.
You've just heard one of 1926's largest hit songs, the beautiful Rodgers and Hart melody of The Blue Room by the vocal quintet The Revelers. This copy of the original 78 RPM Victor record being from Bananas Records in town, meaning there's a good chance that it never left the Sunshine City when it sold a century ago, possibly from the Waring Music Company in the Victor building on the corner of 1st Avenue and 6th Street. Sunshine 96.7 celebrates the 100th year opening of that record store today, July 16, 1926 to July 16, 2026. Made by the famous band leader Fred Waring, this record store supplied top-of-the-line phonographs to the Tampa Bay area, hosted popular and concert artists from all over the world, and gave the Sunshine City a constant supply of Victor records like the ones that you've been hearing today, first of its kind in quality, as one should expect from the people behind his master's voice. Outside of just hosting shows of the classical and concert stars in the Victor building, they also sold tickets for shows happening across town, such as in the First Congregational Church or in the Coliseum just blocks away on Muir Lake. When Victor artists came to town, they made sure to stop in to see the Waring family, hear their own records or those of their peers, as well as meet other musicians there. The popular Victor dance bands coming through here from this period, outside of Waring's Pennsylvanians, included Gene Goldkit, Blue Steel, and Jan Garber, which includes so many famous musicians from the likes of Joe Venuti, Kenny Sargent, Eddie Lang, Steve Brown, Charlie Warren, possibly Big Spiderbeck, and plenty more. Jan Garber was especially notable, as the pianist was Rudy Rudisill, who was previously in town for several years, leading a band at the Coliseum with Thomas Danks, and wrote some songs about the area. When Jan Garber came to town in March of 1927, his whole band appeared at the Victor Building and did some record signings and even broadcasted over local station WJBB. That station was located down on Central in what is now the shuttered Goodyear Tire Building next to the equally shuttered Playhouse Theater. But that station became the regular place for the Waring Music Company to show off its newest records by the latest artists back in 1926 and 27. Of course, with that was Jan Garber's and Gene Goldkit's latest hit records, so let's hear some from them now. Babyface by Jan Garber, his biggest hit of the year, along with Lonesome and Sorry by Gene Goldkit's band, now over Sunshine 96.7 FM.
Baby face, there's not another one to take your place. Baby face, my poor heart is jumping. You sure have started something, baby face. I'm up in heaven when I'm in your fond embrace. I didn't need a shove, 'cause I just fell in love with your pretty baby face.
Are you lonesome and sorry? Oh, say
Lonesome and Sorry, played by Gene Goldkit and his orchestra, along with Babyface by Jan Garber's orchestra. Both songs selling for the record label Victor, and St. Pete's own one-of-a-kind Victor record store, the Waring Music Company, a century ago back in 1926. Both of these songs you've heard here were also transferred by yours truly from locally acquired original copies of the 78 RPM records. So there's a chance, however slim, that these could have been sold originally back in the Waring Music Company of the Victor Building on First Street, and was held by members of either Gene Goldkit or Jan Garber's bands when they came down here a century ago. Either of these copies could have also been played by local radio station WJBB as a showcase of Waring Music's newest records. You never know. Speaking of radio, in 1926, Victor Records would unveil a new kind of phonograph in their line, being an original type of what we would call a console stereo today, being the Radiola. And one side of the furniture piece would be a top-of-the-line RCA radio, and the other side would be a new orthophonic Victrola. So you could play your own records on one side whenever you wanted, and on the other side listen to music from all over the world. Quite literally. Radio was a lot different back then, and you could tune into stations in New York or California, and, depending on whether in position, the United Kingdom or South America. Everywhere with Victor artists too. So something that the Waring Music Company did often would be push ads for a new radio concert on some distant station in New York or so by the newly made radio network NBC, and have a ton of top concert and salon soloists in the program's lineup, and say in their ads, "Want to hear these Victor broadcasts right? Go to the Waring Music Company. We'll get one set up in your house in no time, and you'll be able to hear it in time." Yeah, they would push it for days, up to hours before the broadcast aired. This was the Roaring '20s, after all, a time of mass buying, so surely it worked out quite well. So let's hear what people would have heard on one of these broadcasts. Here is the Victor Concert Orchestra with a then-new release of At Dawning. Then after that, we'll play a record by Nat Shokrit leading another Victor orchestra heard on these programs with All Alone Monday, both from 1927 here on Sunshine 96.7 FM.
Singing the blues, all alone Tuesday reading the news, staring and blinking, sitting there thinking all alone. On the shelf Wednesday till the dawn comes, by myself Thursday twirling my thumbs. Friday is my day, so I spend Friday all alone. On Saturday I dread the coming of Sunday. Monday the week starts anew. I'm certain I could endure the week to the end, and I'm sure the days I spend wouldn't be lonely if I were only all alone with you.
That fun number was All Alone Monday by Nat Shokrat and the Victor Orchestra, along with the star singer of Johnny Marvin. Before that was At Dawning by the Victor Concert Orchestra led by Rosario Borden. Both songs were likely heard over radio in 1927 in the St. Petersburg area when sponsored by the Waring Music Company, St. Pete's very own Victor record store, founded by bandleader Fred Waring on the corner of 1st Avenue and 6th Street. Both songs you just heard were from the original Victor 78 RPM records, copies from my own collection found right here in St. Petersburg over the years, meaning it's very possible these were originally from here and sold at the Waring Music Company too. The Waring Music Company would run into 1927 with a lot more success. With so many different national names coming down here to St. Pete to play there, it inspired another local music store, Philpitts, to invite dozens of concert, salon, and operatic stars to come down here and perform in their store, which also carried Victor Records. Plenty of these shows would happen in their store on Central, or at first Congregational Church too, both of which no longer exist. In the spring of 27, a former blue steel clarinetist named Frank Buckles opened up a repair department in the Waring Music Company, which could repair dozens of different types of instruments. More radio broadcasts would happen with New Victor Records Weekly over WJBB, sponsored by the store, and plenty of good times were had at the old Victor building. But all good things must come to an end, and when it did, it was in the fall of 1927. Due to factors likely stemming from the land boom turning into a bust all over the state, the Waring Music Company filed for involuntary bankruptcy on September 15, 1927. It ended up closing and liquidating all of its stock by December in a massive multi-week auction. Worse still, this is largely what bankrupted Fred and Tom Waring themselves. But unlike their store here in St. Pete, the Warings both came back from it. The 20s and the 30s would be kinder to them as they would still be national names throughout the Great Depression and even to this day. Fred himself in the 80s ended up eventually funding and making what we know today as the Waring Blender. Bryce Wilmuth, once the general manager of the Waring Music Company, later opened the Wilmuth Music Company in the same spot. Later, other stores came there as time went on. A century later, no one knows it at the Victor Building anymore, but they may know of the businesses that occupied this corner storefront: Heron Central, Twig, The Dress Up Studio, and the Book and Bottle. The majority of these places have left the building unrecognizable from the inside, filling in doorways and hallways, hiding the once beautiful second-story listening salon with a drop ceiling, and removing the original floor, all except for the Book and Bottle. Come in there today and you'll still see lots of the original interior, checkerboarded flooring and archways too. Victor itself would become RCA Victor later in the 20s and eventually went out in the 80s, becoming just RCA as we know it today. Gene Goldkit, Jan Garber, Fred Waring, Nat Shokrit, and all the other artists featured here are still well known in the musical circles to this day in the history of popular music, jazz, classics, and the opera. But on the other hand, the Waring Music Company today is completely forgotten about, outside of perhaps scholars of Waring's Pennsylvanians. But now, since rediscovering it, I'll make sure to talk about it in future episodes of Dance Man Days, where we can hear more of the Victor records sold there. For now though, here's one last song to tribute the Waring Music Company and the Victor Building, being from Victor's then biggest artist of all time, Paul Whiteman and his orchestra. From the summer of 1927, here is Broken Hearted on Sunshine 96.7 FM.
If you're going my way, I've got a story for you. You've heard of my old gal Mary, you've heard of my old pal Jim. Look over there, I'll tell you where you find her spooning with him. There she is, my old gal, there he is, my old pal, and here am I, broken hearted. Mine in May, his in June, she forgot mighty soon, and here am I, broken hearted. The last time that we said goodbye, I knew that she was through. It's bad enough that I lost her, I had to lose him too. There they go, in their joy, happy girl, lucky boy, and here am I, broken hearted.
Broken Hearted, played and sang by Paul Whiteman and his orchestra, A hit record in 1927, sold and advertised by the Waring Music Company, once the biggest and best record store in St. Petersburg. A full century ago, from 1926 to 1927, on the corner of First Avenue and 6th Street. For the past hour, you've been listening to Sunshine 96.7's tribute to this piece of St. Petersburg music history, previously forgotten about for the last century. The story of the Victor Building and the Waring Music Company. Thank you all for listening. All of this music here has been brought to you from several sources. My own personal copies of these Victor 78 RPM records bought over the years from the largest record store in the world, Bananas Records, back in our own backyard. One from a fellow collector and colleague up in Tarpon Springs, Tyler Baldwin. My friend Maya, my audio engineer who helped make the background tracks when used, sound the very best they could be. Check out her YouTube channel where she uploads more of her own records, Maya's Vintage Vault. And lastly, a few transfers courtesy of the YouTube library of vintage music, the 78 Prof ran by Bob Moak. Some obscure information was sourced from musician and jazz historian Javier Soria Lazo of Spain. Thank you to the folks of Sunshine 96.7 as always for letting me put on this show for you all. Chase Porter, Sunshine City native, signing off.